Aloha everybody, my name is Kanoa, Leahey, and welcome to Ka Pewa by Hawaii Community Foundation, where we navigate some of the state's most important issues through conversation with some of the top leaders, some of the top experts as it pertains to some of these subjects. And through some of this conversation, the hope, of course, as always, is to come to some kind of agreed upon solution and perhaps project to a way where we can have a positive impact on our community. We continue our discussion about the housing crisis specifically on the island of Maui. Welcome back to another episode of Ka Pewa by Hawaii Community Foundation. We continue to navigate through the state's top issues through conversation with some of the top experts as well as in-community leaders to help find common ground and solutions to challenges impacting our daily lives. And we continue to focus on the housing crisis specifically on the island of Maui. And with that, we welcome Stefan Pellegrini. He is the principal and vice president at Opticos Design. Stefan, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kanoa. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you performed, in essence, what is known as the Missing Middle Housing Study, conducted as part of Hawaii Community Foundation's House Maui initiative. There are not a lot of people perhaps that are familiar with what missing middle housing specifically is. Could you describe to us how you would define it and why you think it's important here on the island of Maui?
Sure, that's right, Kanoa. When we think about missing middle housing, we think about multifamily housing that really looks and acts like a single family house. So we think first and foremost about housing that has multiple units in house-scaled buildings. And we call it missing because in many of the places that we love, some of the towns where we may have grown up or places that we visit, this housing was sort of a normal part of life. But particularly in the last 40 or 50 years, many communities have stopped building it. So it's a really important component to the places that we know and love.
Yeah, it actually is illegal in a lot of the places around the country because there's been such a prioritization of single-family homes and single-family homes permitting. What do you think can be the impact of returning to allowing for some of these missing middle housing structures to once again become part of the community?
One of the great things about missing middle housing is that it really provides a wider variety of choices for people, gives them additional opportunities in terms of housing choice. We can think about how single-family homes are great for families, but there are increasingly more and more households in the United States and here in Hawaii that can actually benefit from different kinds of housing. Those may be housing for folks that are at the end of their life. Maybe their kids have grown up and moved on, and they're looking for a smaller household, opportunities to downsize. There are also many people who are hoping to actually someday have a single family home, but they're at a point in their life where that is a future goal. So we might think about apartments, smaller units, places where people can still live in community and still enjoy the benefits of a neighborhood, but can have alternatives to single-family living.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who believe that the housing crisis, specifically on the island of Maui, which has been so exacerbated by the wildfires in Lahaina in August of 2023, that it is at a critical point. And so how do you see this being a benefit to the community on Maui?
We know that even before sort of the terrible fires in Lahaina, that there was a housing crisis that's been built for many, many years. And in fact, Hawaii is representative of one of the, if not the most expensive housing market in the United States right now. And so this idea of having an affordable place to live is really sort of a crucial component of our lives. And I think it's important not only for the folks that are here today, but also future generations of Maui residents. We want to make sure that they have places to live and work that are affordable and attainable in the future.
Is there any kind of concept as to where specifically on the island of Maui the strategy of missing middle housing could potentially be most impactful?
When we think about missing middle, we want to sort of think about housing opportunities that provide what we call neighborhood living. And that's different from, we might think about big city living where you might be living in an apartment above a store. It might be sort of a dense area. But we think about missing middle housing as an opportunity to provide a neighborhood setting. That might be a chance for you to have your kids walk or bike to school, have a chance to sort of go out and walk the dog and meet other neighbors. And we recognize that that kind of living is actually something that's very desirable for a lot of folks in any community. And that can be a priority. Here on Maui, there's a lot of places where you can live that way and actually be adjacent or close to amenities. They could be places, historic main streets, places like Upcountry in Makawao, where you might be able to live down the street from stores and services. There might be other neighborhoods where you could live close to a school or close to an institution, and you can meet some of your daily needs just by living in a walkable space.
Now, there are obviously going to be some obstacles, regulatory and otherwise. What has been, in your experience in studying missing middle housing in other parts of the country, what has been your experience as to what some of those obstacles, what some of those barriers represent?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that missing middle housing is often missing because it's not really allowed anymore by current zoning. And what we've seen in many cities across the country have sort of worked to regulate it out of existence. This kind of housing used to be sort of a normal part of single-family neighborhoods. Now in many locations, it's really no longer allowed. So a first step to actually bringing it back to some communities is to take a hard look at our zoning regulations to try to understand how it actually might be able to return to some of these neighborhoods.
There is a certain culture that is at hand here, especially when you talk about the island of Maui and really elsewhere throughout the state, because there are logistical potential difficulties and challenges that are presented by missing middle housing as well. One of them, parking. Everybody in Hawaii likes to drive their own car. So how do you navigate around some of those challenges when you're talking about multifamily dwellings?
Yeah, parking is key. And one of my colleagues likes to say that parking is destiny. If you don't have the parking figured out, you're not going to be able to sort of do anything else. And I think it's a really sort of important thing to think about. One of the reasons why we like missing middle housing is that it's scaled in a way that we can still accommodate cars on site. It's not something that we need to sort of say there's not going to be, it's either housing or parking. And in fact, in many of the places where we looked on Maui, there was enough space on the parcels and the lots that we have today to accommodate parking. But what we want to do is think about ways to actually encourage that neighborhood living where you can have a car, you can park it on your property. If you need to actually take a car to work or do other things, it's accessible. But also live in an environment where you can actually make a choice to at least take some trips every day and not need that car. And that goes back to that idea of neighborhood living, living close to centers and amenities in the community where you have that opportunity. And a lot of people today live in places where it actually may not be possible to go out and walk to get a gallon of milk or have your kids walk to school. But there's a lot of places, particularly in West Central and South Maui, where we see a lot of potential for that living to occur.
What is the target demographic for missing middle housing? Who are the specific people within the community that you feel like this will most benefit?
That's a great question. I think when we start to look at that closely, we realize that there is growing numbers of people that sort of would find this kind of housing interesting. I mentioned that on one end, we have empty nesters, people who actually might be interested in downsizing from a larger single family home, but still sort of living in a place where they can actually have community and neighborhood amenity. At the other hand, we have folks that actually might just be coming out of school and have an opportunity to live in their first apartment or live in their first unit on their own. But they still are also looking for opportunities to live in community and live in a neighborhood scale. And then really sort of across the spectrum, we have a lot of households now that we would say are sort of non-traditional. We like to think of, households in the United States as a mom and a dad with 2 kids and a dog, and here in Hawaii, also probably a surfboard and a kayak.
Maybe several more dogs.
But today it's actually interesting that in the United States and also here in Hawaii, the majority of households are now only just one or two people. And so there's opportunities to think about how we can actually make housing that is sort of a better fit for the needs that those kind of households have.
The housing crisis is also twofold, because you're talking about having to attempt to fulfill needs for short-term housing as well as needs for families and generations who are going to be interested in trying to establish long-term housing and ownership. How do you navigate between those two needs?
Yeah, that's a story that we hear a lot. You know, a lot of folks may live in Maui today, but they're struggling to try to understand, how could my kids put down roots here? How can we make sort of future opportunities? Often when we use the term missing middle, we think about this scale, but also the need to think about housing for a middle class income and a middle class household. And so thinking about the longer term, we want to sort of see if there's opportunities to build housing in our communities that can really be available in the future. I think any of us who sort of have kids or who have families that family members that actually maybe have gone through financial hardship, the idea of sort of housing and the stability that it brings, I think, is something that everybody can wrap their head around. And so it's really important that we can sort of make these changes, because building housing is not going to happen overnight. It takes sometimes many years to sort of bring and introduce new housing units to a community. And there's a great opportunity in Maui to sort of start planning for that right now.
Yeah, what is going to have to happen at the legislative level and otherwise to open the door for missing middle housing to become something that is more of a reality?
That's a great question, Kanoa. And we're sort of front and center thinking about zoning regulations as sort of a good first step to start to think about how missing middle housing can be made possible and achievable in many neighborhoods on Maui. This is something that other communities across the United States are grappling with, that they're realizing that the housing stock they have and the zoning regulations they have just aren't meeting the mark and being able to sort of deliver this kind of new housing. So making changes to the zoning is a first step. We want to make sure that it's actually allowed for this kind of housing. We've had great conversations while we've been here with developers, other folks who are interested in building housing, and it's a common thread to say we would love to do that, but we can't do that and actually have it be something that's allowed under current regulations. So that's a great sort of low-hanging fruit opportunity for us to tackle.
As far as the changing of the sentiment within the community to make people more aware of this as being a possible alternative that can help maybe provide at least a piece of the solution to the challenges faced here in this housing crisis, as it's referred, how can people learn more? How can they become involved?
Well, House Maui has been a really strong proponent and has started to actually make a lot of resources available on their website to really share with the community about the housing needs and how missing middle can actually be an important part of that solution. There's an opportunity to sort of plug into a more national conversation about missing middle housing. We at Opticos are sort of were cognizant of sort of the need to talk about this. We started a website, missingmiddlehousing.com, that's sort of open to everybody to go and sort of learn more about this topic. And we're sort of realizing when we go into communities now, there are folks really sort of from all walks of life that have a strong interest in sort of talking about and advocating for this housing. And it's an important opportunity to sort of join that conversation.
I would like to hear upon the conclusion of this podcast episode, just kind of open the floor for you. If there's something that you feel like we haven't touched upon that you think is a key piece of information that you'd like to make sure is stated here.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of things. I think one is sort of just thinking about legacy. We're a point in many communities on Maui, but also across the United States, where we need to think about housing for the next generation. And there's a real opportunity for us to kind of do something about that legacy. And it's really important, I think, to think about how our kids and younger families have an opportunity to just have that housing stability in the future. Another sort of really important thing to think about is infrastructure and how we make our communities. We want to actually make walkable neighborhoods. It means that we need to have safe places for people to walk and bike. We also need to make sure that our key infrastructure is provided and supported. So that's the way we think about delivering water and wastewater, other amenities to communities, and to make sure that there's a nexus between how we provide that and where we actually put housing in our communities. This is a really important thing that Maui County Planning does when they're thinking about sort of the future roadmap for the community. And there's a real good opportunity to really focus on this in a way that will provide a positive roadmap moving forward.
Stefan Pellegrini, thank you for being on Ka Pewa.
Thank you so much, Kanoa. It's my pleasure.